Are you nervous? No, there's no need to be nervous.
We implore this court to hold that Puerto Rico's constitutional rejection of the death penalty renders the Federal Death Penalty Act locally inapplicable, and that where specific and fundamental Puerto Rican values are threatened, an explicit and clear statement from Congress is required to override such values.
So you're saying the Federal Death Penalty Act does not expressly include Puerto Rico?
Yes, Your Honor, it does not expressly include Puerto Rico. In fact, if we look at the legislative history of the FDPA and the text of the Federal Death Penalty Act, nothing shows that Congress even intended this act to apply to Puerto Rico.
Does anything exclude Puerto Rico?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Does anything in the act, and in terms of the congressional intent, exclude Puerto Rico from the applicability?
Well, Your Honor, the text of the FDPA, Congress intended the text of
I think that's a yes or no answer.
Well, there's nothing explicit, Your Honor, that Puerto Rico should be not included in the FDPA's reach. However, if we look at the exclusion that Native Americans have, we can see that Congress intended the Federal Death Penalty Act to have a substantive impact on the death penalty legislation in the country. And that impact, that substantive change, Your Honor.
Well, you mentioned American Indians. Were they excluded?
Yes, Your Honor.
Expressly?
Yes, Your Honor. They were expressly excluded. However, there is USC Section 1152 explicitly states that the general laws of the United States as to the punishment of offenses shall extend to the Indian country. Now, what that means... Shall extend to the Indian country. Now, what that means, Your Honor, is that...
No, well, we're not talking about the... I was just using that as an example of how they know how to exclude. They could have excluded Puerto Rico, could they not?
Yes, Your Honor, but the only reason...
Did they?
No, they did not. But the only reason that Congress included the explicit exemption of the Native American tribes was because of USC Section 1152, which specifically states that punishment of offenses shall apply to the Indian country. Without that exemption of the FDPA, Your Honor, the Native American tribes would automatically be included in the FDPA's application.
Is there such an exclusion for Puerto Rico?
Well, what we have to guide us, Your Honor, is the Federal Puerto Rican Relations Act, Section 9.
So I have to go down to Puerto Rico's Constitution and look at that in order to interpret the federal statute.
Well, yes and no, Your Honor. The Puerto Rican Constitution helps guide us in reaching that this interest is, in fact, a locally sufficient interest that meets the local inapplicability language of the Federal Puerto Rican Relations Act. However, when we're analyzing whether or not a federal statute should apply to Puerto Rico, we look at the Federal Puerto Rican Relations Act as Congress intended us to do. Now, the language of the Federal Puerto Rican Relations Act, Your Honor, incorporates locally inapplicable. And that language comes from the Foraker Act of 1900, which specifically was made to give deference to local conditions in emerging territories. Further, if we look at the Elective Governors Act of 1947, which preceded the U.S. Puerto Rican Compact of 1952, that act, Your Honor, explicitly stated by Congress that locally inapplicable was to refer to local conditions. And that was guidance for the president, who Congress gave authority to determine whether or not a federal statute was locally inapplicable to Puerto Rico.
We respectfully request this court affirm the lower court's ruling and find that the FDPA is locally applicable.
I understand that, but tell us why we should.
For the following two reasons, Your Honor. First, Congress has the power to enact the FDPA exactly that. And the cornerstone of determining whether Congress intended for a statute, in this case the FDPA, to apply is to look at congressional intent. Congressional intent can be inferred from a variety of different sources, such as the history, other statutes, and the pervasiveness of the problem. In this case, there are two instances of note. The first is other statutes. Section 924J is the statute that actually prescribes the death penalty in this case. The Federal Death Penalty Act is merely a method of applying the procedures, laying down the procedural safeguards that must be satisfied before the death penalty can be applied to this case or any other case. the actual statute which prescribes the death penalty is the Section 924J, and it states that it shall...
We get that, but how does Puerto Rican's constitution that says that there shall not be a death penalty of Puerto Rican citizens crime take place in Puerto Rico, how does that affect that analysis?
It affects the analysis because it brings in that local applicability standard from the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act.
So that's the Puerto Rican word. Oh, is that a federal word also?
That is a federal word, Your Honor.
Okay.
That comes from a federal statute.
Okay.
And Congress merely needs to comply with that by expressing their intent. And they've done so in that Section 924J, which says it applies to the states. They define state as including both the District of Columbia and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico.
It explicitly mentions Puerto Rico?
In Section 921, which is the definitions term for this 18 U.S.C. Section 924J, it explicitly says the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Now, that's not the Federal Death Penalty Act, but that is the statute that prescribes the death penalty in this case. The FDPA merely lays out the procedures that the court must follow.
Let's say the procedure was intended by Congress to apply. Let's look now at the penalty itself, which is really the crux of the situation, in that it goes counter to the Constitution of Puerto Rico's prohibition against the death penalty.
Yes, Your Honor. And that Puerto Rican provision in their Constitution will allow them to abolish the death penalty in their local courts. And previously it worked to abolish it overall. But Congress, in the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act, which was approved or enacted prior to the approval of the Puerto Rican Constitution and developed this compact, left in language, verbiage, which allows Congress to apply federal statutes above and beyond this local and applicability standard. It says those statutes except hereinbefore or hereinafter applied. And Congress has this power due to the territorial clause of the United States Constitution. Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. Congress is textually committed to overseeing the territories, and in this case, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico.
But once the compact was created, supposedly Puerto Rico was no longer a territory, but now it had a different relationship to the United States pursuant to the compact. So maybe that may not be your strongest argument with respect to applying the territorial clause to this situation. The compact really created a gap between the territorial clause and Puerto Rico because now it's a different relationship.
Yes, Your Honor. However, that compact also created this mechanism for applying federal statutes to Puerto Rico above and beyond the not being applicable, which is exactly what Congress has done in this instance. Now, petitioner may contend that it has only been applied, the FDPA has only been applied geographically. However, in the past, the courts have found that to be enough, even not looking at congressional intent and sticking with the canons of statutory interpretation, first looking at the plain language of the statute. The First Circuit in Guerrero v. Alcoa Steamship in 1956 found that a workers' compensation statute, which was locally inapplicable, was found to have been expressly applied to Puerto Rico because Congress said to all navigable waters of the United States. And since Puerto Rican lied within the navigable waters, it was said to apply clearly and explicitly. The same is true in this case. When Congress said to the United States as a whole, Puerto Rico is part of the United States.
Yeah, the other argument against that, though, is that in this situation with the navigable waters, an argument can be made that navigable waters does not equate to death penalty. So the death penalty, because it's qualitatively different than navigable waters, that would justify Congress, the application of that law, irrespective of whether Congress made it specific or not.
Yes, Your Honor, and this court has on several occasions noted that death is different, but it's different from a procedural standpoint. Procedural safeguards have to be put in place to reinforce the integrity of the system, and that is exactly what the FDPA is trying to do, set a uniform system of procedures that the courts must follow in order to safeguard the rights of all American citizens. It makes no sense for Congress to apply it specifically to Puerto Rico or specifically to California, Michigan, or Texas, because the FDPA was intended to be a uniform across the board method of ensuring that the procedural safeguards that this court in the past has been so mindful of are in place. They're codified in statute, and they extend to protect all citizens of the United States.
Wouldn't it have been better if, in light of the fact that Section 9 of the compact exists, for Congress to make it explicit that it be applied to Puerto Rico instead of making us go through all of this and deciding what the intent was?
Your Honor, Congress was explicit in the actual statute which prescribes the death penalty, and then the procedural statute, which is for the entire United States as a whole.
I don't have a problem with the procedure.
You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Chief Justice Perry, Your Honors, and may it please the Court. My name is Rebecca Medina, and I, along with my co-counsel Jacqueline Guzman, represent petitioner. We respectfully request that this Court hold that the Federal Death Penalty Act is not applicable to Puerto Rico for the following two reasons. First, applying the Federal Death Penalty Act without a voting representative in Congress violates petitioner's right to substantive due process. Second, applying the Federal Death Penalty Act to Puerto Rico violates the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Do you think if Congress were to enact a law making Puerto Rico pay federal taxes, that would be okay?
Your Honor, yes. In that situation, it is different than what we are dealing with here. Right now, we are dealing with a fundamental right to life.
You say Congress can pass a law allowing Puerto Rico, mandating the Puerto Ricans pay federal taxes?
Excuse me, to pay federal taxes? No, Your Honor.
That's what I meant, federal taxes.
Okay, sorry. No, they are not, Your Honor.
Well, why not?
Because this court has established that voting is a fundamental right, as stated in Bush v. Gore in the year 2000. Now, Puerto Rico does not have a representative vote in Congress as they should, and it completely goes against the consent of the governed.
So you don't think that Congress has the power to pass a federal law like it applies to all the, unfortunately, to all the other 50 states where we have to pay federal taxes? You don't think Congress has the power to make Puerto Rico pay federal taxes like it does to all the other states?
Absolutely not, Your Honor.
Why?
There are 4 million people in Puerto Rico that are unrepresented in Congress right now, Your Honor.
But isn't that true for all the other laws that have been found to be applicable to Puerto Rico? And no one has questioned them, where Puerto Ricans have not had an input into those laws?
Such as the Social Security Act.
Unfortunately, it is, Your Honors. However, that is why we are here today asking you to find that the Federal Death Penalty Act is not applicable to Puerto Rico. Now, this court has also held that death is a different punishment than any other punishment given, even a 100-year life sentence.
So it's different than wiretap?
Correct, Your Honor.
It's different than navigable waters?
Correct, Your Honor. We are asking for the federal death penalty not to be applicable since it goes against the consent of the governed. Your Honors, here, Puerto Rico deserves a right to vote on the issue prior to it being applied to the Commonwealth and taking away their citizens' right to life. Your Honors, these are U.S. citizens that we are dealing with, and they do have a voice to express as well. Now, the U.S. does give Puerto Rico a representative in Congress. However, without a voting right, they are silenced completely, Your Honors, and that is not fair to the U.S. citizens residing in Puerto Rico specifically. Furthermore, the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, states that every citizen is supposed to be given the right to vote. Now, applying the Federal Death Penalty Act in Puerto Rico without giving their citizens this right to vote is completely contrary to what the U.S. has signed. Your Honors, in this case, these 4 million people in Puerto Rico are subject to a law that they have absolutely no say in. A law that takes away their most basic right to life, Your Honors, and this cannot happen. As a U.S. territory, they are subject to certain federal laws. However, due to the seriousness of this issue...
What's the territory now?
Excuse me, Commonwealth. I misspoke.
Okay.
You know, it's really the Estado Libre Asociado
Sí, señor.
that we translated as quote-unquote Commonwealth, but literally it means free associated state. Estado Libre Asociado is the free associated state. So in a way we're a state, but only associated. We're free, but associated.
Yes.
So we have a special relationship with the United States.
Correct.
So doesn't that really go to the applicability or non-applicability rather than this other argument of the non-representation argument?
Respectfully, no, Your Honor. That actually enhances our argument that since we are like a state, we should be afforded under Amendment 14, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution a representative vote in Congress. Now, since we have been treated as a state, and we are state-like in many ways, Puerto Rico deserves the right to vote prior to applying a federal death penalty act.
Can Puerto Rico opt in or opt out of being a state?
Can they?
Yes.
No, they cannot, Your Honor. Now, we do ask that they gain the representative vote. If not, the Federal Death Penalty Act should be held inapplicable to Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
You ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. May I please score?
You may.
I'm Darren Chambers, and I also represent the respondent in the United States. This case is about the express authority under the Constitution. We respectfully request that this court affirm the First Circuit's decision for the following reasons.
But let me ask, are you arguing on the issue of the Fifth Amendment, whether it's violative of substantive due process?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes. For the following reasons, there is no due process violation. First, that Congress has express authority to legislate over the territories.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I need to know these answers. Do Puerto Ricans vote in Congress?
Puerto Ricans have a resident commissioner, but they do not have members of Congress, no, voting members.
Do they vote?
No.
Okay, so the answer is no. But yet Congress makes decisions that affect Puerto Ricans, although Puerto Ricans do not have input into that decision, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I asked the question before on taxation. Does Congress have the power to impose federal taxes on the people of Puerto Rico?
If Congress made legislation to...
Just like passes the IRS as it affects us, that we have to pay federal taxes come April 15. Well, some of you do, I don't, but that's another issue. They're after me now. No, I'm only kidding. Seriously, the Congress has made a decision to have the income tax, correct?
Yes, sir.
Can it extend it out to Puerto Rico?
If Congress made legislation explicit
Yes.
to Puerto Rico, yes.
Won't Puerto Rico then have a Puerto Rican Tea Party over there? You know why I say Puerto Rican Tea Party? What was the reason why you had the Boston Tea Party?
I was taxation without representation.
Now, that's taxation without representation. Isn't this matation without representation?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Isn't this matation without representation? Matation is a word that I've taken from Spanish, matar, to kill. So I anglicize it into matation. So matation without representation would be akin, I would submit, or for you to rebut, that it would be akin to taxation without representation.
In other words, killing without representation is equal to taxation.
Yes, Your Honor, but still under Article 4, Territories Clause, Congress has the right to legislate.
Territorial, but I thought that we had eviscerated some of that territorial language by the fact that it became a Commonwealth through the compact. So it may not be, the territorial analysis may not be applicable here when we no longer have that relationship, but rather a Commonwealth compact relationship.
Your Honor, then Article 4 also states how states become admission of new states. Puerto Rico has not been admitted as...
Puerto Rico is not a state. They have a constitutional provision that strictly prohibits death sentence.
Yes, Your Honor, as does Michigan in their constitution. Again, the standard that this court uses is one of a national standard, looking at not only the states, but the Commonwealth and
Puerto Rico
territories.
is really a part of the United States, although it's not a state.
Although it's not a state, yes, Your Honor, it is a part of the United States, and it's looked to as a whole to determine if it offends those the decencies and sensibilities of the people, Your Honor. And this court has stated that it does not.
Excuse me. Didn't Congress give up a little bit of its sovereignty when it allowed itself to come into an agreement with Puerto Rico under the Federal Relations Act?
Yes.
Did they give up a little bit of their self, of the United States, I mean?
Yes, sir. But it still made. It still
in terms of the business of locally inapplicable.
Yes, Your Honor. But it still maintains the federal reach that it has. It still maintains that if federal laws are violated within Puerto Rico, that they're seen to in federal courts, Your Honor. So it did not give up that authority. Again, the Fourth Circuit and the Second Circuit have also stated that the Federal Death Penalty Act does not violate due process. It goes again to the legislature trying to make a universal system to get rid of the arbitrariness. What the FDPA does is it does protect petitioners' due process. It gives a standard that's used throughout the United States reach of how to apply the death penalty. It protects against arbitrariness how the death penalty is applied across the United States. Also, Your Honor,
You have a minute.
it's used. It's also used against foreigners who have no representation. If someone who's not from this country comes here and violates a federal crime, they face the same death penalty that someone from Florida does, that someone from Puerto Rico does, and again, they do not have representation either. They've never had representation, and they're not even United States citizens. It's applied systematically and alike through all areas of reach of the United States. Your Honor, for these reasons, we respectfully request that this court affirm the First Circuit's decision.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think this concludes the arguments. You rebut?
Oh, that's right.
Then you flip a coin.
Hi, Your Honors. Just one point on rebuttal. Respondents stated that this application of the Federal Death Penalty Act does not shock the conscience and that it is a national standard. However, this court has held that shocking the conscience looks to conduct that is brutal, demeaning, and harmful in order to determine what shocks the conscience. And it is brutal in the sense that we are taking away a U.S. citizen's life without
I get that. What I don't get is it shocks the conscience in Puerto Rico, but not in Florida. I mean, why is it different? Who really wants to die?
Your Honor, it shocks the decencies of civilized conduct.
So Puerto Rico is civilized and everybody else is.
No, everybody is civilized, and it shocks.
It shocks everybody's conscience. Okay.
Correct, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you.
So,